Hello everyone, my name is Erin Osborn and today we will be discussing my capstone project for MAT 655. The topic of discussion is the subject of closing the gap between English language learning students. So first off, I'd like to go over what an ELL student is. ELL stands for English Language Learner. This constitutes any student that has a primary language learned previous to English. In 2016-2017 school year, there was approximately 1.332 million English learners in California public schools. So it's very predominant in California that there are students that have previously learned a language prior to English. ELL students constitute 21.4% of the total enrollment in California public schools. A total of 2.6 million students speak a language other than English in their own homes. And this number represents 42.6% of the state's public school enrollment. In California alone, some of the top most spoken languages besides English are Spanish at 83.10%, Vietnamese at 2.14%, Mandarin at 1.59%, and the list gets smaller and smaller and smaller, but primarily Spanish-speaking students are the most common in California. There are many questions we must answer and consider when thinking of ELL students. How can we incorporate their cultural identity into the classroom? Even though they have a hard time with certain aspects of learning in the classroom, many ELL students want to feel valued and welcomed in the classroom and in the environment, and they like to bring their own identity and culture and diversity into the classroom. And this is helpful for the students to understand and adapt, and sometimes it's a fun way for them to feel valued as a student, because even though they have a hard time understanding and it takes them a long time to process and learn certain things about English, it's fun for them to bring their own culture and identity to the classroom and be able to teach their other classmates about their culture. Another question we can answer or ask about these students, or does low SES apply to these students? In some cases, yes, this does apply to these students that they are of low economic status, but it does not apply to all of ELL students. A lot of times their parents are very involved. It's just that they're from a different culture and it's a hard time, and we just have to make sure that we are getting them involved, but it can be difficult. How do we improve their learning experience? And that's kind of another thing we have to bring to the board when we are reviewing and creating something to help students improve. Based on what we've already discussed about ELL students, what can we say our goal is? Our goal for ELL students is to ensure they are getting adequate education as well as acquire full proficiency in English. We also like to assure that English learners within a reasonable period of time achieve the same rigorous grade style level academic standards that are expected of all students, including those not of ELL. How do we get there? First, we need to make an initial assessment of these type of ELL students. Each student that comes into the school is required to take a California English Language Development Test, or CELDT. This test is administered for initial identification purposes within 30 calendar days from the enrollment of the student, whose primary language is something other than English, and is determined by the home language survey, which is given to the school by automatic enrollment. When they first enroll, parents must fill out paperwork, and that's where that home language survey comes in. The primary purpose of the CELDT is to measure English language proficiency of students to ensure appropriate instructional placement. This goes based on where teachers need to be aware of their structure and need to make accommodations for these types of students. To identify new students who are English language learners in kindergarten through 12th grade, this test is used in a form to determine where they lie. To determine their level of proficiency and to monitor their progress in learning English, we also use this test as an annual test, and students go back to it every year to test their proficiency and how well they are progressing in the English language. This test is also used to show whether a student is proficient in English, and we use that in the reclassification stage of the program. Next step to evaluate is curriculum, and what we must do is use EDL standards to set achievement goals for these students. We do also need to monitor English language development of English learners. Lastly, we do have annual assessment, which is an annual CELDT test, which is what I explained before, is that students must retake this test every year to show their proficiency and their standing for the English language. So once an initial assessment is done, curriculum is catered to these specific students, and then an annual assessment is done yearly, we can then reevaluate and reclassify these English learners. The first criterion is an assessment of English language proficiency, which is where the California CELDT assessment comes in and is coupled with a mastery of the EDL standards, which is again the curriculum. Next is going to be the second criterion, which is a review and analysis of the student's performance based on results from the student's CST English Language Arts score, and then of course many other test scores and considerations are taken into that as well. The third criterion is a teacher evaluation of the student's academic performance. This can be based on the student's current report cards, grade point average or GPA, writing samples, and formative assessments reflecting the mastery of state standards. Lastly, the fourth criterion is parent opinion and consultation. This involves parents or guardians in discussion of their students' English language proficiency and meeting the guidelines for reclassification. Once a student meets all these reclassification standards, the student can be reclassified, and then his or her academic progress is monitored for the next 2 years or following 2 years, depending on their status. Once a student is then reclassified, we can then go ahead and evaluate, use the data that we've collected over many students using qualitative and quantitative data to keep track of progressive and non-progressive students, and keep reports of ELL students and show progression of the program. Now, if there is some stagnant improvement, we must reevaluate the plan. ELL students and progression is an ongoing problem in California and in my predominant surrounding school district, and it is a problem that needs to be addressed on an annual basis because there are always students coming in from other places, and we need to make sure that we are addressing each student directly. We want to make sure no one gets left behind and everyone is being monitored in progress and they're showing improvement. And unfortunately, because this is such an ongoing problem, we need to make sure that we are always keeping up with the times and making sure that we are showing progression with the students and making sure that they're being evaluated and taught and given the opportunity to do well. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion, and I hope that we can always keep the discussion open and honest, and hope that we can just keep going and keep performing and keep getting students in the right direction, because as educators, the most important thing is student progression and student success. Thank you.